Thank you all so much for joining our conversation today, our expert exchange, AI legislation to watch in the 50 states. Before we hop in, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes. First, note that the session is being recorded, and we'll distribute the recording after the event. Also, I'm seeing somebody was in the state, reside in Oklahoma, work as national. Yeah, Oklahoma was our bet, whether or not someone from Oklahoma was going to. That's so cool to see. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming, Jamie. Also, know that this conversation is going to be mostly led by your questions. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A tab. If you have any questions for Caleb, feel free to throw them in there. And then there will also be an option for you to vote on what questions you want to be asked. So if you click on over to the Q&A tab, you can also vote on important questions as they come in. All right, my name is Patrick Haley. I get to lead engagement and events here at Quorum. I have an incredible opportunity to speak to tons of great public affairs professionals through our webinars and events like these, our AI Inner Circle, and also Wonk Nation, our Slack community. Second, I want to acknowledge Molly, who's on the ones and twos. She's supporting us on the back end for our webinar. You'll see her name occasionally pop up in the chat, and I might ask her to highlight some of your questions as well. All right, now let's introduce our speaker. Today we're joined by Caleb Max, President and CEO of the National Artificial Intelligence Association. Caleb, do you mind introducing yourself for everyone?
Yes, I'm happy to, and thank you, Patrick, and the entire team at Quorum for inviting me. I guess this afternoon, I was about to say morning, this afternoon, this gray DC afternoon, to talk about AI policy and 1,100 AI bills. I always like to start my conversation around AI policy by saying, on the state level, that if anybody brands themselves as an AI state policy expert, I question them, because there's so many. I don't know how anything other than maybe an AI tool could possibly keep track of all of them, and maybe a Quorum AI tool to do that, right? So the sales team will be reaching out. I am not getting it, so that's a free plug. So yes, I'm the CEO of the National AI Association. I'm also one of the co-founders. We launched in January of this year, so we're less than a year old. We're growing very fast. For the folks that are, which I assume is most of the crowd, government affairs professionals and people who have worked around Washington, D.C., you'll understand the distinction that we function a lot like a coalition, probably more than an association, just because artificial intelligence spans so many different industries. It's not just tech companies or big tech companies that are affected by AI policy. It is a slew of different industries, ranging from small under 10-person startups building specific AI tools for different data sets and industries, all the way up to some of our largest members like Oracle, Heinz and Ingalls, who build all of our ships and submarines and operate our small modular reactors. We have Capital One, obviously a household name, a large financial services company, all the way down to, I talked to one of our founders yesterday. He's got a small company that helps folks building clothing. He has a big database of manufacturers of different brands of clothing from around the world. And you can take a picture of a t-shirt or something someone's wearing and figure out, using his AI tool and his product and a monthly payment plan, where in the world it was created and what the supply chain looked like getting it there. So you can help make, if you're interested in buying it or building it yourself, it obviously shrinks down your time. So all that to say, we deal with a very wide range of companies. And so AI policy affects them all very differently. We're up to about 1,500 member companies. Again, most of those are small. We have a pretty large group of government contractors. Obviously, with AI mostly being a tool that goes on big data sets, a lot of AI companies and services are trying to sell into these state and local and federal government and database work. So, there's a lot of work we do on government efficiency. But primarily, our main differentiator in the marketplace is we are unapologetically pro-AI. I believe that AI will be net good for society and for the United States. I believe that we must win the AI race with the Chinese Communist Party. I believe that, we want to see all of our friends and allies, as the Trump AI Action Plan calls for, to be built and wed to the American AI tech stack. And we're unapologetic that it will be a net good for society, and that bad regulation is just that. It will stifle innovation, and we're going to try to beat that at all possible cost. So not to say that other groups out there don't have the similar take, but I do see a lot of calls from different, maybe more think tank that tend for more regulation. We are very much so let AI innovate. So with that, that's the short introduction.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the landscape. So first off, do you see the U.S. Congress putting restrictions on state legislatures to pass their own AI laws?
Yes, and actually, of course, anybody who has an X account or follows anything in DC policy, of course, yesterday saw the President Trump put out a tweet calling for a preemption. There was already, of course, one major preemption bill that tried to get passed at the end of last year. I believe Ted Cruz was the one leading it, and it ultimately got denied. It was a 10-year moratorium on states passing their own AI bills. Truthfully, 10 years is probably too long for most folks to feel comfortable. However, it just showed the need that, one, there was a overarching concern about how AI was going to be regulated on a national scale, and secondly, that the Congress was interested in putting together their own AI bill and probably needed more time. So now what's interesting about the preemption bill that they're trying to do today, or I guess this week, is that they're trying to stick it in the NDAA, which shows that they're trying to call the preemption, in this case, a national security issue. So I'm told that this is a joint effort between the Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Armed Services Committee to try to pass this. And of course, Trump, endorsed it pretty heavily and openly on X and other platforms earlier. I saw that the White House put out a big press release. I do think it's interesting. Last night, of course, all of the major players in AI, or many of them, Elon Musk, David Sachs, I saw Jensen Huang and NVIDIA were all at the MBS dinner last night. And then, of course, this tweet came out. So I'm sure there was a lot of AI discussion around the dinner table. And I have no, doubt that that's what helped put this. So long story short, I do think that this is something that they'll try again to pass. And I think this has got more steam than it did last time.
Interesting. Do you think states are going to preempt it? So do we have a sense of whether states are taking into account the federal government's potential preemption of AI regulation at the state level? So how might federal action, either in the executive or Congress, impact state legislative momentum?
Well, I think for a lot of states, I don't know if it'll put any pause. If anything, I assume this would accelerate the willingness or interest in passing state AI bills, just because you don't know how long those will last and what kind of longevity they'll have if there's about to be a federal preemptive bill. I will always say that the federal preemption bill we're talking about still leaves open a lot of room for states to do legislating beneath that. I'll give you an example. I like to use this example in a lot of things we do, but if you think about the highway system, if you're trying to build a federal highway system or doing something with such interstate ramifications, which obviously I think everybody agrees that artificial intelligence is not just a geographic policy issue. There's been lots of different bills where Congress, who actually has the congressional and constitutional authority to regulate interstate commerce, has stepped in. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 comes to mind, the Internet Tax Freedom Act. There's the Copyright Act of 1976. So there's a lot of times where Congress will step in and try to set a framework, set a best practices bill that still, again, leaves the door open for states to come in and shape that for what it looks best for them. And so, at any rate, I do think the short answer to this question is yes. I think in the near term, this will accelerate the number of bills we see on the state level as states are trying to get their thoughts and ideas into law, so that way it's all taken into consideration when you do a national bill. Just to give you a little example, the EU AI Act, which has now been, I think it's been active for almost 18 months now, maybe a little longer. I might be wrong on the time, but it's been in place for a little while. They're actually thinking about doing an adjustment in the spring in Brussels because it's been so stifling to innovation. However, as I spend a lot of time, of course, reading AI bills and talking to folks in the industry and the government affairs world, a lot of the ideas that you're seeing at different states in state level bills here in America are taking ideas from the EU AI Act because it was large and first in many respects. And so I think there's also an argument, if you like your ideas, if you're a state and you want your AI ideas on regulation included in a federal bill, then you'd be incentivized to put forward those now to try to start, kind of casting the line out, if you will. So in the short term, I think you'll see a lot more state AI regulation.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm curious about that. So you mentioned that, your member organizations are, large organizations, right? Or they might be like a 2 or 3 person startup. And I think it's really interesting that when we talk about AI, if you were to replace AI with just like algorithm, like suddenly like these conversations make a lot less sense of like, should we ban algorithm, or like, it's just so big and broad, So I'm really curious about like, will we continue seeing states taking on a more like comprehensive approach to regulation, or seem to move to address AI regulation on an issue by issue, industry by industry, like use case by use case basis?
Sure. Well, I'll give you just a story from kind of my world, if you will. A few weeks ago, in the same hour at 3:00, I had a potential member call with a company that builds AI-powered drones that are currently in use in Ukraine. That basically it's crazy technology. The drone takes off, somehow it flips over and turns into a weather balloon. It flies however high in the sky, hovers over a target that's been pre-trained to target, and then drops, and every time the Russians shoot one down, it costs like $1 million, right? So in many times they never actually reach the target they are hoping to hit. However, it costs the Russians a lot to use it. But ultimately, they are an AI company because everything they do would not be possible without artificial intelligence. So that was at my call at 3:00. At 3:30, I had a call with the head of government affairs for AI for McDonald's. He was talking about all the different ways that artificial intelligence is going to affect their apps and the different systems they're building and tools and logistics. And then at 4:00 that same day, I had a call with a company that builds AI-powered mailboxes that help read the mail and stuff coming in and give you updates to your phone, right? So this is all in the same hour. 3 different companies, 3 different places in the United States, 3 different sizes. One was about a $25 million a year company. McDonald's, of course, one of the biggest companies in the world. And then this small mailbox startup in Indiana that's about 10 people. And if you think about it, AI policy affects all 3 of those guys very differently, but they're all still very worried about it and curious how it will affect their business. So I give this example to say, I don't know if you're actually able to do a comprehensive AI bill that will answer all the questions for every industry, just because it is going to be so broad. So that's why whenever these states put out these bills, whether it's about algorithmic regulation or the different LLMs or the databases, sometimes I wonder, have they actually gone and thought about all the different ways that there might be AI already being used in their state, companies in their state, small businesses, people trying to innovate and implement. And I think oftentimes, if you really get down to nitty gritty, they probably haven't taken all that into consideration, because a lot of folks, tend to think when they think AI, they just think of ChatGPT or a handful of different products, and not all the vast other ways that artificial intelligence is going to affect our economy and society in very beneficial ways. So I would hope a federal bill would set up these more national frameworks, and then maybe the states can get a little more nitty gritty for what makes sense locally.
Totally. So that goes really well into this next question from Paul, which I think is really smart. How well prepared are Hill staffers around what AI actually is, and how it can be used well to advise the representatives and senators?
Yeah, so fascinating question. Great question, actually, and very timely. So last week on Thursday, I had met over lunch with the head of member services for the Republican side. And of course, member services, member administration committee oversees a lot of the tech in Congress and what kind of things they're updating and using and tools. So for instance, they oversaw attaining co-pilot licenses for Hill offices to use. Actually, this is a fact that very few people know. It just came out this week. there was a $6 million, I believe, I might have the exact number wrong, but it was like $6 or $7 million allocation in the continuing resolution to actually give Congress the budget to go and buy, I believe, I might be wrong, verify me, but OpenAI and ChatGPT licenses so that the offices can start using that. Now, what's interesting is the offices, in order to implement AI in their enterprise, in their quote unquote small business that is a congressional office, have to put it together an AI policy for their employees, just like a lot of businesses and enterprises are now implementing. And what's interesting is that has to go through member administration committee, and I believe that policy is actually on their website. If people are interested in seeing what Congress is putting out for their staff for AI use policy, but at any rate, the way the gentleman told me the story is that as of right now, because all of those policies must get basically signed off by member services committee, that only, I think he said, maybe 50 or 60 offices have submitted them, which means that only 50 or 60 offices are officially using an AI in their office every day to do their job. And obviously there's 435 members. That's just the House side. So on a large scale, that means not a lot of people are using AI in Congress. Now, I'm sure individual staffers are and doing different research and tools. But I actually recently, we did an event and the head of government for OpenAI was there. And he made the point that this is a pretty common thread. Most enterprises will use AI as much as their leadership. So if the CEO is using, basically they'll take their cues from how the CEO uses AI in their job to know how they can use AI in theirs. And so if only 50 or 60 offices are using it, and then the other interesting fact this gentleman told me is that probably between 40 and 50 offices on the Hill basically banned AI from being used in the office whatsoever, which I thought was very interesting. So, and it's almost bipartisanly. So that just goes to show you that the regulatory body for Washington and AI might not be actually using the tools as much to be able to speak to this intelligently, which is why I think if we're going to do a moratorium, it should probably be, shorter, not 10 years, and more so just a temporary holding bill for them to do the education, have the correct hearings and committees to do the work of a comprehensive AI bill and go from there. And the last fact I'll say about this, because it is interesting, since you mentioned Hill staff, the Connect app, CNCT, does daily polls, and they had one last week of Hill staff, and I don't know exactly how scientific they are, but at least a couple hundred staffers will apply to each one. Do you think that AI is a net good or bad for society? And 48% said net bad, or will make society worse. 48% of the respondents. And if you looked at the breakdown, 43% of those were GOP and the rest Democrat. Now, it didn't get into the analytics of how many were senior staff or junior staff or committee staff and all that. But just generally, if 48% of Hill staff in this bucket of a couple hundred thought that it's bad, that means that AI companies have a lot of work to do in educating Hill staff and their state legislators and everybody else on all of the great benefits of AI.
Interesting. Yeah, the bit about like it coming down from the leader is really interesting, of like AI adoption. I mean, fact check me in the chat, everybody. But does Chuck Schumer still use a flip phone? So like, if that's what is going on with leadership, I wonder how that is going on across the organization. So one of the questions that's right at the top, most people are voting for this one, which is what legislation should be passed to assign cost of AI infrastructure to the data centers that require it?
This is a complicated question because this, going back to preemption, anything that deals with data centers, local zoning, et cetera, should always be a state, state or local policy area. And so I think, I don't know exactly what a federal bill would look like to hand off the cost of AI infrastructure to data centers. If somebody has an idea there, let me know. But I mean, generally, I would say, obviously these companies invest a ton of money. They, charge heavy fees to use this cloud infrastructure. We know we need a lot more compute. And so that's why you're seeing all these companies, Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft pour heavy money, not only into the data center infrastructure, but the energy infrastructure. How are you going to power these data centers? And so, it's a complicated question. I'll tell you, I live in Loudoun County. We are the #1 data center capital of the world. So on a personal level, I see data centers every single day, not because I'm the CEO of the AI Association, but because I drive past them on the way into DC. And, I'll be honest, they're not that great looking. They're loud. People who live near them complain about all different sorts of things. And so I understand why, there's kind of a lot of hate around him. And then there were some articles that came out in recent months about energy bills rising and the ratepayers paying to basically build this AI infrastructure, which of course, being a Loudoun County resident with the most data centers in the world, I started looking at my energy bills going, hey, am I subsidizing these data centers? And I think there's a lot, because so many have been built and so fast, a lot of that, more of that research will come out probably in the long term. But I will say the Trump administration is doing fantastic work with the Energy Department and others to figure out how to build these data centers as, what they call hyperscalers, way out in the middle of nowhere on their own grid, away from houses. I think that's probably a good long-term solution. And as states, I think this is something that states directly need to kind of build plans for their state. I mean, I have a small farm. There's all these different rules around, where you can and can't graze cattle and build barns. And the state kind of sets those policies for farmers. So that way your local county can't come in and say, well, the neighborhood next door doesn't like the way the pigs smell, right? Well, the state says, well, we understand that farming is a big industry here, and so we're going to protect that. And so I think states should be putting in kind of statewide data center development plans where they should be located. Unfortunately, because data centers do require a lot of power, that typically means they have to be near city infrastructure, right? And so that means they might be next door to a school or a hospital or a neighborhood. And I think that's where a lot of the kind of quote unquote hate around data centers comes from, is because people are so close to them and they see them and they don't understand exactly what they do. So again, I think that should be a state legislative action.
Yeah. So along the lines, if we go into like specific like impacts from AI, so like data center energy usage is one, but there's a big one around just workforce. It's been referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around taking a new approach to upskilling individuals to be a part of this evolving labor market.
Yeah, I think the education piece, and I saw when you gave me the list of questions people have been asking, there's a lot around AI and AI education, and I think for good reason. And the Trump AI action plan actually put in a lot of provisions for asking schools and school districts around the United States to put in these sorts of AI education plans. The truth of the matter is, AI is here whether you like it or not. I always tell folks you're probably not likely to get fired by AI or replaced by AI. You're more so likely to get replaced by somebody who's using AI to do their job 10 times more efficient than yourself. And so to me, the bigger risk, if you want to talk about systemic workforce risk that I would be more concerned about, would be making sure that everybody who wants to access AI tools has the ability to do so and at an affordable price. In the long term, I think that's going to be a bigger differentiator. This kind of, I'm giving this a hypothetical, but I could see things like this happening. If you're a local plumbing company, you've got 30 employees and you're running your back office with AI, and your company down the street that's competing with you is still, has a 4 or 5 person back office doing all your scheduling and billing and invoicing. Well, obviously in the long term, theoretically, the AI is going to be a lot cheaper than having all, 5 employees sitting in the office. And so, you're going to be able, as the market works, lower your costs. And so if obtaining the AI tools and data is prohibitively expensive, or worst case, if the owners aren't educated on how they could even be using AI within their enterprise to become more efficient, then that to me is a differentiator where they're going to potentially suffer quote unquote costs of AI development. And so I think a lot of this could be solved by universities and high schools and elementary to teach students exactly what AI is, how it works, what's the math and science behind it, understand that it's ultimately all boiled down from data. And so you can't trust everything. You still have to verify it. Teach them I remember when I was in, high school not that long ago. We had a TI-80 calculator, and we had classes on how to use the TI-80 calculator better. Well, there should be classes on how to use the AI tools better and check them against each other and build these kind of infrastructure. So I do think there is some, dare I say, reluctance from education systems to start doing this, because I think they're probably concerned that at some point somebody could learn everything they ever want to know on an AI and maybe not pay for private school or something like that, right? But knowing that it's here and it's here to stay, these schools and universities should really jump on that. And so again, I think there are some states, Tennessee, Georgia, come to mind, that have passed really great bills from their state legislators to encourage their school districts to put in place these plans ASAP. And so I think in the long run, that's something, again, where the states with their education money flowing out of the federal government or otherwise should be quickly building those kind of policies for their states.
Yes, you mentioned Tennessee. I'm curious about like continuing education as well. So in addition to, young folks who are entering the labor market, I'm curious what your thoughts are on folks who are currently existing in the labor market.
Yeah, I think again, one of the best parts about AI, and of course many of the folks on here I'm sure use AI frequently, is if you have a question about something, you can ask it, how do I use you better to do X, Y, Z? And so again, just being an active user of AI will already put you probably in the top 10% of AI users. If you just, before you do a task, say, let me see if I can use my AI tool to do this better, and literally ask said AI tool, can I do this more efficient using the tool? And so again, because AI is very efficient in this way, I actually think upskilling and stuff won't be as hard or laborious, because the training tools will be at our fingertips. And actually, a lot of the companies that are members of our multiple members of our association actually are building these sorts of tools for upskilling using AI within your company. So think taking all of your company's training models and procedures and handbooks and all of that and digitizing it, and for every single role. And so as you want to move up in your company, you can basically kind of borrow the brain, if you will, from somebody who's above you in a different area of or department or division of your company, to upskill yourself based off the things they know. And so actually, if we really think about it, what artificial intelligence ultimately is the democratization of knowledge to the entire world, if they can access it. I mean, that's the key. But a student in rural South Georgia can theoretically have a conversation with somebody who's as trained as a Harvard mathematician on a science or math equation that they might be working on for their project. So again, I think that's a great democratizer. And one of the things that's different about the AI revolution from past revolutions is that it will democratize knowledge at a very large scale. And the last thing I'll say about the workforce, I saw this example on X. I thought it was very interesting, because I'd never thought of it. Back when the British Empire was massive and moving all the different freight and everything else around the world, there used to be literal factories of people at the East India Trading Company, for example, that would just sit and write all the receipts and bills of sale and sign all the checks on Friday. I mean, there were just thousands and thousands of clerks doing all this for the massive empire that was the East India Trading Company in the United Kingdom government. And now, of course, I mean, I don't think there's a small business with 10 people in the world that doesn't use a Paychex or an accounting system to do exactly that, but very fast. And I don't think anybody sits and goes, well, gee, we lost so many jobs because we didn't have enough people to write checks out by hand every day. And so, again, there will be those kind of cataclysmic market shifts, that a lot of which we aren't even aware of what they'll look like in 5 or 10 years. So in the long run, I don't think this will affect the workforce.
I hear that. One of the examples that I heard that really stuck with me is how when Excel came out, there were articles written about how it was going to kill the market for accountants, right? And there are more accountants now than ever. It's just that accountants just now use Excel versus, all of us pretending that we have proficiency in Excel. So
right. That's a great. No, I agree with that.
Yeah. One other great implication that I heard a bit, and I got the chance to speak at a great nonprofit event a couple of weeks back. that algorithmic discrimination and algorithmic bias came up a good bit as it relates to AI. So I'm curious how AI legislation can address algorithm. Speaking's hard. Algorithmic discrimination.
So I always qualify these kind of questions by saying I'm not a super technical person. I'm a lobbyist. I'm someone who likes to shake hands and smile and advocate less so than do technical stuff. And algorithmic is a big word, and that's very technical. However, I will comment this way. I think the best way, and maybe this is just me being a free market capitalist, but the best way to avoid algorithmic discrimination is to have more artificial intelligence in the marketplace. And to give you, an example would be, if you don't like the way OpenAI or Anthropic, Claude, and ChatGPT respectively are answering a certain question or working in your enterprise, then you have the opportunity to go and implement a Grok that advertises itself as the free speech artificial intelligence. And so I think in the long run, if AI legislation seeks, if the Congress or states seek to get involved with the algorithms, it will make for less opportunity for more AI in the marketplace, which will lead to the few that are in control or have the biggest market cap to be dictated to by the government. And I also say, from a free speech aspect, if you think of, maybe this is a stretch, and maybe there's some constitutional lawyers in the chat that are about to roast me, but from a free speech perspective, I would say, these algorithms in some sense are free speech. I should be allowed to train my algorithm how I see fit. Now, obviously, there's liability questions and different questions that might come later downstream, but at the front end, to me, the best way to have no algorithmic bias or make sure there's not too much discrimination would be to have a lot of options in the marketplace, just like any market solution can occur. So that'd be my big answer. And I also, there's so many different companies that are, ones that you'll never read about in the news, or, might not run across, I dare say, your entire life, that are building really great algorithms to answer all different kinds of questions. And so I just don't think that one bill can accurately encompass everything. And additionally, I don't think that we have enough agreement on terms to actually build a legislation that would accomplish. So I'll give you an example. There's in AI and pricing discrimination, for instance, bad language definitions. You'll have bills that say consequential decisions must be XYZ, or reasonable care, high risk. A lot of these bills, when you start reading them, you start to ask, these terms don't make much sense, and they can be interpreted so many different ways. And so, again, going back to if there was going to be a federal preemptive bill, which I believe there will be, and I hope there will be, one of the things that I think should be included in a federal AI bill would be a defining of all the terms, so the states can then build out their own legislation, and then the market can be doing market decisions based off the same definitions, at least. I think that would be a good start in a way that the government could get involved.
No doubt. I'm curious, as it relates to algorithmic discrimination, is this something that you're hearing concerns about from lawmakers, in those conversations? How much is this coming up to you?
Well, I'd say, we're in a Republican Congress and Republican Washington, for lack of a better term. And so obviously, if you think about big tech, and historically, the conservatives have kind of been anti technology or anti big tech, and I think social media and all this sorts of stuff and the algorithms associated with social media have been a net bad on children. And again, a lot of their concerns and things that happen are probably accurate. But if you want to go back in 2000, 2001, when we had the tech boom occurring, we didn't understand, if the idea that if you could go back in history and say, well, if we'd just done XYZ bill from Congress in 2002, we would have stopped all this. Well, you didn't even know where it was headed. Who would have thought, every single kid would stop watching TV and be watching 10-second clips of their favorite, whatever, or again, I just don't. There was no way to predict where it was going to go, and so I always laugh when people say, "Well, we need to regulate this, or we don't know what's going to happen." And I think, again, because we have the example of the first tech boom, I understand where those calls come from, but I also don't know how you could accurately say you can predict where it's going because it's moving so fast. And so I say this to answer your question, because Republicans felt that big tech was against them for a long time and the algorithms were against them on all the different platforms. I think they used that as a reason to make sure it doesn't occur again with AI. And so I do think, and I don't talk to every congressman every day, of course, but I do think there are a lot of members that, while they have the three branches, would like to put in a free speech AI bill, if you will, or a bill that they see will prevent what happened with social media companies later on. Whether or not they'll be able to pull it off, that's a whole nother question.
Interesting. Another big implication is around copyrighted content. So do you foresee regulating algorithm training methods in relation to copyrighted content? And can you speak a little bit about the content use in training?
So I'll give you an example. I talked a few months ago to a gentleman who worked for the American Chemical Society. And the American Chemical Society puts out and again, it's all above my pay grade, but effectively a chemistry weekly newsletter or something to that effect, that what scientists can do is they can go in there, chemists, and say, I'm going to go out and try to solve this chemistry equation. And this is the experiments I'm going to run. And I'll check back in a year and let all of you know how I did. And so this online, again, it's not even a newsletter. I think they have another word for it, but booklet where these scientists would do these sort of hypotheses and then they would report back on how their experiments went, was online. And a certain AI, which I won't name, went in and scraped that list, paid their fee, and got all the data and put it into their model. And so what they saw, what was happening is sometimes, of course, the scientists were putting up hypotheses or problems that they were seeking to solve, and then the answer a year later was, I was wrong and here's why, or oh no, this is impossible. Sometimes they end up being right. But the artificial intelligence that went over and scraped all this to put into the model didn't understand the difference between actual science that worked and the ones that didn't. And so we basically had all this hocus pocus science within the model, and they started identifying this. And of course, it was fairly quickly rectified. Now all of it could be fixed, but it just goes to show you that, if the models aren't trained very particularly, there can be some obviously bad downsides to it. And so I think copyright content, which is, again, going back to federal preemption, the Copyright Office obviously oversees copyright. I think it's really important, and I think most of the models do as well. But there's also, I'll give you another example. I talked to a company today that does a ton of work with the Veteran Affairs Veteran Affairs. Gosh, what am I saying? VA, Veteran Affairs. Not just the committees, but the actual agency. And long story short, there's tons and tons of great medical data within Veteran Affairs that a lot of obviously AI companies want to use for their medical device training and everything else. And there's a lot of conversation of, one, is it okay to share that data? If they do share it, how many companies should get access to it? If there's medical advancements that come out of that, who gets to copyright that? Because obviously all the data and input was from the. So again, now that we have these tools that are able to scrape data and do this sort of training on such a large level that we've never done before, we probably need to put in new terms around copyright in its context to the use with AI, which, again, that's probably a pay grade above me. Once my smart advisory board and members figure that out, I'll be happy to push it in Congress. But yeah, I think there is a fight there.
Interesting. Let's take it back up pretty high level, back to the conversation around like the 50 states. And I'm curious around what your thoughts are about, do you see places where AI laws might conflict or contradict each other? Is that something that you and your team are watching?
Yes, I mean, again, going back to my term, the definitions example, different states look at the definitions different ways. So I certainly think a lot, maybe not intentionally, but accidentally contradict each other. I can't give any specific examples off the top of my head where I've seen them directly contradict and conflict, but more generally speaking, I'll say this: as you have these different states putting in their AI laws, you'll start to see companies. Actually, I think there was even a question I saw pop through that start building different AI models for different states based off their regulatory regimes, and how they define the terms of the law. So I think you'll be able to start seeing more glaring examples of where the laws conflict and contradict each other as more artificial intelligence is developed and implemented within the workplace in our companies. On a macro level, you've seen this with the difference between the EU AI Act and the current federal, United States federal policy towards AI, which is basically, almost none outside some data laws and the cybersecurity stuff we already have through NIST. And you're seeing, the EU and Brussels are under pressure from their companies for no other reason other than they're seeing all the stuff that the American AI companies are developing and building very fast and going, oh shoot, we got to catch up, and we're stifling ourselves by. I mean, one of the things in the EU AI Act is that every single model before it gets deployed has to go through, basically do demonstrations to a regulatory body. Well, if in our example, we have over 1,000 startup AI companies building models for specific industries. If every single one of them had to get in line with a state regulator that probably doesn't know a whole lot about AI to explain to them how exactly their model works, I mean, you can only imagine how burdensome that would be. And so, again, as more and more artificial intelligence gets developed and tools get developed and the use goes up, I do think these laws will become a lot more conflicting. For now, I haven't seen. And the last thing I'll say, I think the only law that's currently active is Utah went into place right away. I think some of the provisions of the California law did, but for instance, the Colorado AI Act and the Texas both come into effect January and February of 2026. So in some sense, we haven't even seen the effects of these bills because they're not actually in place. So these answers will get a lot more clear over the next 3 months.
You mentioned some companies are creating like unique, systems for each state, but how feasible is that if all 50 states had, different AI laws and they had to create, different rules around each individual state?
For the big companies, it's probably fairly feasible in the sense that they've got large teams and dev teams and deployment teams and everything else. Their go-to-market process is built out. Not to mention they have lawyers and everything else that can help them with the compliance side. So for those bigger companies, I don't think it's a big deal. I think for the smaller companies, they'll probably start to pick and choose where it does and doesn't make sense to do business. So again, the feasibility, I can't speak too much to the tech side, but again, going back to the more AI, the better. Putting in these regulations will make it so there's the only ones that are operating in the entire United States would be, a handful of large companies, which I think generally people would disagree with.
Yeah, let's go deeper on that. So Carrie asked a great question around what do you see as the line between protecting, limiting the use of AI and providing appropriate guardrails in its use versus prohibiting and stifling innovation and growth? It seems that this is a topic across many industries. How can we all support appropriate regulation of guardrails while still encouraging innovation and growth?
Well, I think a good example of this is the NIST framework on cybersecurity. NIST, of course, is not exactly a regulatory body, but they put out certain standards and frameworks, and companies are supposed to comply with them. It's probably as light a touch of regulation as you can hope for. So and NIST has put out, according to the Trump AI Action Plan, an AI policy framework, which is pretty extensive. And so I encourage everybody, if they want more information about what states might start to look like as they put these out, it's in the chat there, National Institute of Standards and Technology. That probably give you a good idea. I would say overall, if the guardrails, it's a tough conversation. Again, if you think about generally most people not being super AI literate, going back to the education thing, I don't think there's been enough AI promulgated and used for people to actually understand what law will actually be stifling and what would be an actual guardrail, because there's so many workarounds. So, and you're going to get into a situation where the artificial intelligences theoretically could be trained to go around guardrails. To give you an example, all these states, which I think is a good thing, put out, to access certain adult sites, you have to be 18 or older, right? Well, a good VPN gets anybody around that anyway. And so, it goes to the conversation of, are the guardrails that we put in place actually enforceable across states? And I think the number one, and this is the example you see mostly when people call for a federal preemptive bill, and I know it makes a lot of people frustrated when folks just say, oh, we got to beat China, is the only reason for stepping on states' rights in the way of a federal bill. But I do think a good example would be how many of the companies, as we start doing more algorithmic and guardrail and limiting use of artificial intelligence domestically, start turning to the Chinese models that don't have those kind of tool or laws built into them. So much so that I think it was the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg put out a piece this week talking about how 20% of American AI startups now are using Chinese-based LLMs like DeepSeek, not only because they might be better, but because they have no bias or law or anything else trained into them from a guardrail perspective. And so they feel they're more efficient. And so I think the easiest way you're going to see this in the near term is if other countries and companies increasingly move towards the Chinese models in order to develop their products. I think that would be a good sign that we're probably over-regulating or stifling innovation domestically. And additionally, that's why I think they're doing this out of the NDAA. It is a national security threat that the Chinese artificial intelligence would be leading the charge. And you always got to remember, most of these AI tools, they get better as they are deployed and trained and they have more data sets. The Chinese don't, it's a national government that is obviously very ruthless and takes everybody's data. There's nothing private. There's no such thing as data privacy in China. If they say there is, they're lying to you. And so these AI tools are able to train on large portions of data very fast, which I do think in some sense is putting their tools ahead of ours. Give you an example, if China is implementing, self-driving vehicles, which they are, and one of them runs over grandma, it's pretty easy to hide the story in China, and they're like, keep going, keep developing it. Versus here, for obvious reason, we have a lot of protections around why we don't want that to happen. But that, obviously, the more regulation around that sort of stuff can stop development. So at any rate, I think in the near term, the best way that we will be able to measure how much our regulation is affecting innovation on the state level or elsewhere is how much of our startups and companies developing are moving towards Chinese products.
Interesting. That's a really interesting approach there. Well, there's a lot of safety concerns around, especially moving to Chinese models, right? I would love your thoughts specifically around like safety and risk issues with AI. We had a great question from Jason, which is, what are the safety concerns you see and what is the role of regulation when it comes to safety? And what are your thoughts on regulation that operates principally only through transparency requirements? So really curious, what are your high level thoughts around safety in AI? Like, what are the things that folks should be thinking about as they're, adopting new AI tools? And what have you heard regulators think about or legislators think about as it relates to safety?
Well, most of the safety and risk issues that you see coming out in legislation revolve around children and protecting children, and for good reason. So think of the Take It Down Act with Melania Trump. You think of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Governor Sanders' bill in Arkansas to do child protection and internet safety around AI. So those are, I think, I think protecting personal data, there was a to give you kind of an example, there was a company that used one of the larger AI companies, LLMs, to build a product where you could take a picture of somebody and use it to take off their clothes or put them in weird things. And, obviously is bad. Again, I think those are kind of most of the examples that I hear from legislators, because I don't know if it's just what they see on the internet or their grandkid tells them, but generally those are, I think, the most glaring examples of artificial intelligence gone wrong. Also, it's actually here in Virginia, we just had state elections, and again, I deal with AI every day. I talk to all these AI companies. I like to think I'm pretty good at identifying artificial intelligence and deep fakes. However, one of the candidates running for lieutenant governor put up a photo of actually, I think it was even a little short video, but anyway, a photo of Trump visiting him at his campaign headquarters. And it was so real. I was like, I can't believe Trump would weigh in here and endorse this guy way down ballot. And again, this happened 3 months ago. I'm sitting there like, I was about to start tweeting and sending it to all my friends going, I can't believe this happened. And I was like, wait, but Trump wouldn't do that because he already endorsed so-and-so. Right. And I looked and it was a fake, right? The guy took it down pretty much right away, but this is like an active candidate for office that put this up. So anyway, I think a lot of legislators think more about those things than they do about, dare I say, the more dangerous risks of artificial intelligence within your enterprise, as in Chinese models that are trained to send data back to the homeland. They're trained to hide agents working within our systems. To give you an example, I talked to a guy from CISA the other day. He was talking about how typically when hackers hack a water plant or something like that, generally they're not able to actually do anything dangerous more than maybe overfilling one of the tanks and making water run over until they're paid a couple $100,000, because obviously most hackers don't know how to run a water plant in South Texas. However, with artificial intelligence, you can ask the artificial intelligence, hey, you're now an operator of a South Texas water plant built in 1962. How do I add chlorine to the water tank? So that's using artificial intelligence to do hacking, but not necessarily even just the hacking side, but the actual figuring out what to do once you get in. There are also tons of concerns around kind of poison pills being put into the actual algorithms, where what you're seeing is just an image of yourself or something you generated, and it puts up and you go onto a website, and as you've asked your artificial intelligence to search out websites that have XYZ information, and within that website is embedded code that tells the artificial intelligence to send all of your data to this email address. And so it's like prompting your artificial intelligence without you even knowing it. I think there's so many concerns on that level that haven't been answered, and we don't have good products for. A lot of our member companies are seeking to answer those questions. So there are companies out there that are working on that. I think that's in large part why you don't see a lot of major enterprises really implementing AI, encouraging their employees to use it every day, because they haven't figured out the safety tools and risk tools around it if something goes wrong. But I believe we are rapidly approaching the point where that stuff will be very widely promulgated and those problems will get solved.
Right. I'm curious. So first off, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's been super active in the chat as well. It's been great seeing that conversation going on and sharing some great resources. Seriously, thank you so much. I always love when there's like secondary programming going on in the chat as well. Also, we got a ton of just fantastic questions. So we weren't able to get to everyone today, but we have 5 minutes left. And I would love for you to just leave us with some final thoughts of just like, what should folks generally be looking at and monitoring as it comes to AI and how it will impact their organization?
Yeah. Well, selfishly, I'll say, get on our newsletter, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and everything else. We put out a lot of stuff. We mostly focus federally, but we are increasingly, of course, doing a lot with state policy. So if you're a government affairs professional looking to see how artificial intelligence is going to affect your clients, always feel free to reach out and follow what we're doing. Generally on a larger scale, I guess my biggest encouragement would be become an active user of artificial intelligence, play with the tools, experiment, ask again, go back and ask ask yourself, can an AI do this project before I try to accomplish it myself? It's amazing. I mean, some of the things you can do, pulling spreadsheets and everything else that AI now does instantaneously is pretty remarkable. So become an active user of artificial intelligence, and that will, I think, help you significantly to craft policy that makes sense and works. I'll also say, there were a lot of questions, I think, email before and otherwise. Always feel free to reach out to me and flag stuff. I mean, I think the best way that government affairs professionals can kind of have each other back in this rapidly changing AI environment is to be flagging folks all the different ways AI policy is affecting the different industries. And I love it. I mean, like the Chemistry Society guy flagged me the copyright. People are always. I'm very close to somebody who's over a large fire marshal system out in California who flags different tools that they're getting pitched with forest fire prevention and water and how different laws around data will affect what they're able to do. And so I guess my big closing thought would be, for all of the artificial intelligence junk you see out there about how it's going to kill everybody and it's terrible, for every bad thing that you see every day, there's, I would say, 100x number of companies in the background building unbelievably powerful tools that will make your life better, will make your cost of living cheaper, and will be a net good for society. And so as you're trying to solve very real problems around the bad of AI, don't forget how many companies are out there building really great products that, like I said, will be good for you. So again, I think, and now I'll have my assistant drop my email in the chat. If there's anything we can do, join a company like Quorum. I don't know how anybody tracks 1,100 AI bills across the country without an AI tool, a good AI tool. So I certainly think that's another thing everybody should be doing.
There we go. That wasn't paid, by the way. That was
No, it's not.
The thing we're doing is a little framed to be like, well, how should people be tracking?
And we will be through NAO. We are going to start launching a weekly policy call that will be one that's only for members, but also open so people can flag different stuff. Those will be conference calls you'll be able to access on our website. And so if there's folks that want to join those and get more involved, like I said, AI affects every industry so many different ways. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in every single one. So tell me when I'm wrong. I won't be afraid of getting that kind of criticism.
That's great. All right. As a reminder, we'll distribute the recording in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. This was a great community. I don't know, in the chat and the Q&A. And thank you so much, Caleb, for joining us and sharing your expertise around AI.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.